I grew up, of course, in a very, very different time. That I was born during World War II, which I'm sure for you sounds like it's ancient, ancient history. Was born in Baltimore during the war, but we moved when I was very young to this farmhouse outside of Washington, D.C., next to a creek, and there were 5 of us. So, and of course, this is before television and all of those other things. So we were really free-range kids. We had the run of everything, and it was just absolutely marvelous. So we spent almost all of our time at the creek. And that turned out to be one of the best learning experiences of my life. And I think has drawn me to water and my concern about networks, because, it was like the creek, right? And the woods around the creek. And I remember running through the woods and feeling everything, it's like everything was connected. It's like it was this amazing experiences that I would have in the woods. And it was one of the things I think I learned very early on, was that life is so much bigger than we imagine it to be. And it's so much more interconnected than we ever thought. And that's always stayed with me. And I think that having had that experience as a child was really, really, significant. But also, I think it really made a big difference that I would wander up and down the creeks. And it turns out I grew up on the northwest branch of the Anacostia River, which, of course, I didn't know when I was a kid, but found out as I explored, well, this creek is connected to this creek. And then suddenly I began to understand how the whole system of water in my region worked as I moved into being a teenager. And that was so significant. Because it has, I think, framed my thinking very much about ecology all the way going. Those I think are 2 very important lessons: is that we're a part of everything, and that everything is connected. But I also learned something else that I think might be interesting to people, is that I learned as I was growing up, things that happened to me were very, very personal. But I've learned over time that those personal things were actually a part of much larger movements. When I was an adolescent, because of urbanization, I found out later, in suburbanization, they fixed the creek to stop the flooding, which meant, of course, they destroyed the creek. They took down the woods, they straightened the channels, and essentially wiped out what had been our home as children. And I felt such grief about that, and it felt so very personal. But it wasn't personal. It was happening all over the United States of America at that particular time. It was like we just believed that we could just change things. And here we are, this huge, massive movement, post-World War II, into the suburbs, totally changed the water regimes in such a way that we had to do something about it. But we didn't think about the consequences of what we were doing. I don't believe that we did at that particular point. That had a really big impact very early on, feeling this incredible loss. And then the second thing that I think is emblematic of that is that my father died when I was 13 of lung cancer. And it wasn't until many years later that we realized that he died of mesothelioma, that he was an electrician. He worked in the shipyards in World War II around asbestos. And Monsanto, who was providing it, knew that it was carcinogenic, but offered no protection. So very early on, this sort of injustice associated with environmental decisions became a part of my life. And I think both of those things had a big impact on my growing up and decisions about what I did and how I finally, became an activist, as well as a university professor. So those were the 2 things that gave me positions to be able to take some action in my life.